sweet home, or where the ghosts roam.
You're an absolute gem. Thank you for clicking on my Suspect series. I'm Brooke Makenna, and this is one of my 16 days of Halloween where I will be posting every other day this month. But today's video is about the nameless thing. This is said to be in this location, and nobody really knows what it is. Whether it's paranormal or a super scary urban legend, this is such a crazy story, and if you're into anything spooky, I would really continue listening because I think you will love this. By the way, if you are excited I'm posting so much content this month, I would seriously appreciate it so much if you would thumbs up or subscribe if you're not, or even share this video with someone you think would like it. Now let's get back to the story. Now this all began back in 1940 when an architect named William Kent built a 4-story building in Mayfair at the center of London. It was on Berkeley Square, and the address was 50 Berkeley Square. It was a super nice place with super wealthy and well-known visitors and people who lived in that very home, including the British Prime Minister in 1827, which was George Canning. Now he lived there up until he passed away, and he was the first to see the paranormal sightings and have horrific dreams. And some even wondered how he made it to old age living in that home. Then a lady named Miss Curzon, who was an elderly lady, lived there up until she died at 90 years old. And then a British Prime Minister and writer, Winston Churchill, lived there as well for a time. But this beautiful building had a horror story attached to it. The legend was, even back then, that the attic of that building was haunted by a spirit. That you will see her on the top floor, hanging from the windowsill and screaming. Then you will see her let go, and she will disappear as she falls to the ground below, but she won't really be there on the ground like you expect. People have said to see brown mists and white figures and many apparitions. It is believed that prior to that, a young girl named Adeline had thrown herself out that very window to get away from an abusive uncle. But that's just one version of the story. Some think that it was actually a little girl who was murdered on that top floor by a sadistic servant. And another story even says that there was a man named Mr. Dupree who had an insane brother who he locked on that top floor and fed through a hole in the wall. Either way, the hauntings were said to begin in 1789, 49 years after the building was finished, and has been scaring people ever since. In 1840, a group of students at the tavern about 10 minutes away in Holborn got on the topic of 50 Berkeley Square and the ghost stories surrounding it. A 20-year-old named Robert Warboys had no intention of believing any of these stories or participating in the talk about it. He did not believe in it at all. And so one of the other drunk members of this group decided to dare him that if he wasn't too scared, then he should stay a night alone in that very upstairs floor and see if he saw anything himself. Now Robert was a 20-year-old headstrong man who was stubborn and was going to do this no matter what. They went to the landlord and basically had to beg him to let him stay there, and the owner finally, after much persuasion, said, "Fine, you can stay there, but under 2 conditions. You must have a pistol at all times, and you must move the cord that's connected to a bell in my bedroom if you see anything, and I mean anything at all." And Robert, who still was not scared, said, "Yeah, that's fine, whatever," and went upstairs to sleep in the bedroom. Just after midnight, the landlord told Robert, who was in the upstairs bedroom, good night, and went downstairs to his bedroom. 45 minutes later, the bell in the landlord's room was ringing like crazy, and he sprinted upstairs to see what was wrong with Robert. He opened the door to see everything fine inside the room, except for the fact that Robert was backed into a corner with a look of pure terror on his face and a pistol outstretched in front of him that was still smoking from where he had shot it. There was also a bullet now embedded in the wall. But there was absolutely nothing that the landlord could see in the room. But he had seen this happen before. And then in 1859, a man named Mr. Myers had bought the house. He had bought it for his fiancée. He was planning to marry her in a few days. He had furnished everything inside of it for her. And then a few days before the wedding, she married another man. He was completely heartbroken, and he moved into this house by himself, and he never planned on coming back out. Sometimes neighbors would see him up at night taking walks around the house lit by candlelight. Some said that he was using satanic worship to try to get his ex back with him, which could have awoken even more spirits within the house. He became a complete recluse. The only time he ever opened the door was to get food from his servant, and some believed that he was Thomas Myers, the son of a member of parliament, but nobody really cared that much about his name because he was just a crazy man in 50 Berkeley Square that had slowly gone mad. The creepiest part is it's unknown whatever happened to him because he refused to leave the house, and nobody knew that he moved out. But in 1972, politician Lord George Littleton stayed the night there, and Mr. Myers wasn't there. George was there on a bet, and so he decided to stay in the upstairs room. He brought a shotgun, and he planned to prove to everyone that there was nothing in that house. Except in the middle of the night, he saw a brown misty apparition, and he shot at it. And there was no electricity in this house, so after he did so, he had to wait till it was light out to see what he had shot. Except there was nothing but a shotgun cartridge on the floor. And after that, he forever claimed that that house was supernaturally fatal to body and mind. In 1873, taxes were due on this house, but Mr. Myers, who was supposed to be owning it, had vanished. And so, with nobody to claim the house, it sat there empty. Except for neighbors would call because they would hear screaming coming from it, windows slamming, and all sorts of noises that would need a human there or someone there to make them. 6 years later, in 1879, a family finally moved in there. It was a father and his 2 daughters, and one of the daughters immediately said it smelled like zoo animals in cages in there. So her fiance had actually planned to come down and stay with them, and so they made the maid go upstairs and make one of the upstairs rooms a guest room for him. She was up there working on the room when all of a sudden screaming erupted from upstairs, and the other family members ran upstairs to see what was wrong. They found her backed into a corner on the ground, saying over and over again, "Do not let it touch me." But they didn't see anything there. She was actually sent to an asylum for that and died the following day. But then the daughter's fiance came into town, and he wanted to stay there to make sure everything was safe, so he stayed in that room by himself. In the middle of the night, the bell rang out again, a gun was fired, and when they ran upstairs, they found him on the floor, dead, with his face paralyzed in fear. After this, the house became very well known, and paranormal was very popular at the time. Charles Dickens even had an interest in the house at one point, and there was even a newspaper that said only the bravest men could stay there, so over the years, many would try to stay there, and all would be scared the next morning. Then in 1887, the house was completely empty again. Most people were too scared to stay in it. Then it was Christmas Eve, and 2 sailors happened to be in town with no money. Their names were Edward Blunden and Robert Martin, and they were looking for a place to stay when they happened upon 50 Berkeley Square and saw that it was completely vacant. They made their way inside, but found that the downstairs was too damp to lay down, so they headed upstairs, and Robert fell asleep pretty quickly. They were both drunk and tired, but Edward kind of felt an uneasiness to him, and he couldn't go to sleep. He almost felt a presence with them, and he woke Robert up to tell him about this, and he was just kind of like, "You're fine," and went back to sleep, not thinking much of it. So then Edward went over, opened the window, hoping that that would help to let in some air, and he fell asleep. But he woke up about an hour later to creaking noises as the door opened and sounds of footsteps in the hallway. He let his vision adjust to the darkness, and then he saw something crawling towards them. It was dark and shapeless, and as Edward reached for a fire poker to protect them, he was attacked. His screams must have woken Robert up, because Robert woke up to see Edward being strangled by whatever this was. Robert's first thought was to get out of there, so he ran down the stairs and out of the house and ran to get help from the police. He told them everything that had happened and brought a few of them back to the house, hoping to get Edward to corroborate his story and to make him seem less insane. but instead he found Edward dead on the pavement below, as if he had been thrown out or jumped out the top window. Robert then tried to describe more of what he had seen, and he said he saw a ghost that looked like a man, and when he was describing it, the police realized that that was what Mr. Myers looked like, the man who had died 2 years after disappearing from that house. The house became the most haunted house in London, and many were even scared to get close to it, thinking that the nameless thing, as they were calling it, would pull them into madness and possibly even death. Then in 1930, the Maggs Brother Company, which was an elderly couple, bought the house, knowing of everything that had happened before, but they wanted to turn it into an antique bookshop. They were officially inside in 1937, and ever since then, no hauntings have been reported. But that may be because the entire upstairs is completely blocked off, even from staff. Staff have said they've heard strange noises from up there, but none will dare to go up there, especially because police have put a warning that nobody is allowed up there and nothing is allowed to be stored up there. Some believe it's completely paranormal, and some believe it is something that none of us could even possibly imagine, far greater than science has ever explored. This is before the Maggs brothers owned it. A lot of the sightings had things like sticky liquid, odd noises, and tentacles like an octopus. I mean, it sounds insanely creepy and unrealistic, but think about it. If anything were to scare a person to death, it would be a giant octopus out of water. Many want to know what the nameless thing really is, but there are definitely a lot of skeptics in this case because there isn't any proof. A lot of them say that this old abandoned house is the perfect place to contrive stories and make it seem like one of the most haunted places. And a relative of Mr. Myers says he was often up at night making strange noises, and that a lot of the times the things that people believed were ghosts were really just him. Further research, I found that the bookstore now seems to be closed, and the new owners have reported objects being thrown around, but they still refuse to go upstairs as well. And Victorian poet Frederick Doveton once said about this home, "The cobwebs in the windows lie, and dirt and dust are there. What is the unknown history of 50 Berkeley Square?" And another article once said, "With windows caked and blackened by dust, full of silence and emptiness, and yet with no notice about it anywhere that it may be had for renting, this is known as the haunted house in Berkeley Square." And with this being such an old case and with so many variations of the stories, it's kind of hard to know what the truth really is. But to me, I almost want to believe that in the beginning, possibly people did see paranormal things. Possibly somebody did die in that house and was trapped there, having to relive their death over and over and over again. And possibly this was something that the people with the first stories had never seen before, so it was something that scared them to death because, maybe they had never seen a ghost before. And then it just kind of spiraled out of hand, and the stories got all mixed up with the truth, and then the media got onto it, and it spiraled out of control into something far creepier and crazier than the truth really was. But to me, I kind of do believe in the paranormal, and I think that it's a good possibility that this house was inhabited by ghosts, but I just don't know if it's as crazy as people wanted it to be, or if it was just the perfect place to make up crazy stories so people would want to go see it themselves. Although if these people did really die in that house, I feel bad for saying that, and I hope their families are doing okay, because that would be traumatic. But I thought that it was a very interesting story nonetheless, whether it's complete urban legend, whether it's actually a paranormal story. It is a very creepy thing to think about. If you've ever heard any variation of the story, I would love to hear it down below, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Do you think that it was the truth, or do you think that it was just a stunt to get people into this house for years and years and years? I think it'd be kind of weird that it started way back in 1827 with the British Prime Minister. I don't know why, unless he was really into paranormal things, why he would make that up. But who knows? I guess it's all a matter of opinion. But I thought it was a creepy, crazy story, and kind of a light one to do, so I'm not doing, all serial killers and death and missing people all the time. Sometimes you just need a breath of fresh air. And even though this did have death and, craziness and creepiness in it, it could there's a good possibility that these stories weren't all real, so you can breathe easy on this one, I hope. And yeah, don't forget that I'll see you guys in 2 days, that I love you so much, and make sure to thumbs up so I know that you are enjoying these as well, because I'm working so hard for you guys to post every other day. Yeah, but no matter what, don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.
Never be so sure you're safe. Always have an escape.